Hey everybody, welcome to the Commander Pod, the Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. I'm Spencer Simpson.
And I'm Kelton Hell. Today we're going to be talking about cards from Murders at Karlov Manor that we're excited to see played in Commander. Spencer, what have you thought about the set so far?
Well, my only experience so far has been the pre-release event, which was very fun, but that's not a ton of experience. But I must say, the thing that I'm most excited about are the Commander decks. The value in these things is just absolutely outrageous.
It looks really good. I have a wish list of cards that I am waiting to have reprinted so that I can put them in my Commander decks. And there were quite a few of them that I've been waiting on that got reprinted in these Commander decks.
Yeah, the reprint value was just absolutely crazy. And I, to be frank, own a lot of the cards already. And we do a lot of proxying. We're a pretty proxy-friendly pod in our group. But I wanted to buy a lot of these just so I could get additional copies of them for trades. And the decks themselves even just seemed very fun. I'm especially excited about the Clue deck. I've been wanting an excuse to play Bant. That's not, what's his name? The most played Tulane, Teller of Tales.
Oh, yeah.
He's in the deck, I will say, but I've been looking for a really good Bant deck to play, and I think this will be a fun one to either keep as a precon or, expand on.
I think that'll be a really good one. I don't play very much Boros in Commander. I did recently build a Baloth Baratil and Noble Heritage deck that I've really enjoyed playing. And but I do have to say, there are some of the new cards in this Boros precon that I think look really fun to play. And I think the whole deck might play really fun at like a social, very casual table. So I'm excited to see how they play. Yeah,
we're not going to be talking about any of those cards today, but some of them were certainly on my short list of cards I wanted to talk about because they do a lot of really fun politicking. Maybe we'll do some honorable mentions at the end of some of them or link them in the show notes because it actually seems like a really hilarious deck to play. And I'm with you. I'm not particularly drawn to Boros either. So, I'd say just all of the decks. If this is a home run set, this is what we were hoping Commander Masters would be, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and one thing that I do like about this set is that it's a top-down designed set where everything is prioritized around flavor and the mechanics are built around flavor. And it just makes a very interesting set with a lot of variety. And I like to see that. And it makes it really fun to add fun cards into the Commander card pool. So very excited about that. I did notice, so we each picked a few cards that we wanted to talk about from the set. What I noticed was I don't think we picked any commanders. I don't think we picked any legendary creatures to talk about.
Oh, that's hilarious. No, I don't think we did.
So there are a lot of cool commanders from this set, but we just picked some interesting cards that are going to go in the 99.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I was looking at some commanders, but I think part of that is that I'm not necessarily brewed out, but I do a lot of brewing, and recently, I've been trying to focus on getting my current deck lists in a state that I want them to be in, and that state is kind of ever changing as they keep releasing really cool cards that I want to put in them.
Yeah.
So,
totally. Awesome. Well, kick us off.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, start us out. This one, I think, is one you want to put in your Commander decks, right?
It is. And it was actually one that I opened at the pre-release. And so I immediately started looking at it and thinking, oh boy, how can I play this card? It's Outrageous Robbery. And it's X black for an instant. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. And if you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. So right off the bat, there are quite a few unique things about this card when compared to similar effects. Number one, it's an instant speed. A lot of these effects happen at sorcery speed. So this is a way that you can hold up your mana if you have other interaction in your hand and you can, pass priority around the table. And then when it comes to someone's end step, if you still haven't used any of your interaction or any of your other instant speed stuff, this is a great way to use your mana before your turn to make sure that you haven't wasted any mana. Additionally, in black, a lot of the times when we get card advantage spells in black, there's some sort of like you lose X life or something like that. And there's no life loss on this card. It's great.
Yeah, and I will say, like, to some degree, obviously it's drawing you cards and it's not drawing them from your deck, which, is a downside to some degree, but it also acts as like pseudo interaction, right? Like, somebody tutors something at the top of their library, or they're doing some sort of Sensei's top deck manipulation.
Yep.
And
Or you
say,
bounce
okay,
something
sweet.
to the top of their deck.
Sorry?
Yeah, or you bounce something to the top of
Or
their
you
deck.
bounce them to the top of the deck and you say, sorry, that's mine now, actually,
Yeah.
and I'm going to do that at your end step so that I can get it on my turn.
Totally. And there's fewer restrictions on this. Like you can play cards, so you can hit lands too. It's not just cast spells. It's for as long as they're even exiled. A lot of this is just like impulse card draw, where you have until the end of your turn or the end of your next turn to play them. You can play these as long as they're even exiled. And they're face down, which is cool. So a lot of the cards, the exile cards for you to play, are face up. But this way, none of your opponents know what you got, including the opponent that you stole them from. So just a lot of kind of weird things that don't usually go on these cards that make this card a lot more flexible. You did mention it is your opponent's cards. It's always worse to play your opponent's cards than it is to play your cards.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The card that it actually just reminded me of was Gonti, Lord of Luxury, which we had talked about this prior, and I hadn't thought of this one. Gonti, I was trying to see how many you exile. You only exile one for 4 mana. You get a 2/3 Death Toucher, which is better, and you get a look at the top 4. But this is instant speed. So, and Gonti was played for a long time as a very good card in Commander, and obviously Commander's changed since then. But this gets you X cards, which I think just even adds to its flexibility. So like I was saying, you can use it as an interaction, get the top card that they tutor for you bounced, or you can pump it up higher. A card that you mentioned yesterday, a deck that you mentioned yesterday that it goes very well in, is Prosper.
Yeah.
One of the most popular Rakdos commanders, and so powerful with exile cards.
So good. Yeah, this card is busted with Prosper. Another Exile Matters commander that it's pretty good with is Umbrus, Fear Manifest. That card is 3 blue-black for a 1/1 Nightmare Horror, but it gets +1/+1 for each card your opponents own in exile. So it actually pumps Umbrus when you do it, which is really cool. And you could do it at instant speed. So you could swing in with Umbrus, and if he's not blocked or you need to win a combat, then you can snap off Outrageous Robbery, which is kind of fun.
That's pretty awesome. I have never played against Umbrus, so that one wasn't one that popped into my brain. But especially in Black and Dimir, I feel like I'm not thinking about exile synergies as much. Maybe more mill, but
yeah, and I think there's probably more Dimir synergies in Theft decks. So one of my favorite decks to play is a really casual Grima Saruman's Footman, which I have built as like a play your cards deck. And there's some other ones that do very similar things. So like Tasha the Witch Queen, she gives you a 3/3 demon every time you play a spell that you don't own. Don Andres the Renegade, that's from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, you create 2 tap treasure tokens, and creatures that you don't own get +2/+2 menace and death touch. So really good card in those decks as well.
that's so phenomenal. So Don Andres is one I wanted to put in. I was making a Evelyn the Covetous deck, trying to make a vampire deck. Don Andres, so cool. And this card goes in there for the exile synergies, but definitely synergizes way more with Don Andres or Tasha as your commander, because you have that payoff for exiling cards specifically that aren't yours in the command zone.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Something else to think about, this is an X spell, and so there are other X spell matters decks that this is really good in, like Zaxara, the Exemplary, which gives you a Hydra. So this would be, exile that many cards, you can play them, and you create an XX Hydra, which is pretty cool. Or a recent one is like Rowan, Scion of War. So you can use her to discount this spell and make it easier to cast.
So I saw you had this one written down, and that's one that has been really popular, I think, in Casual Commander and even in CEDH, because you take that life loss and it discounts your spells by that much, right? Isn't that
Yep, that's how
Rowan's
Rowan
ability? And so yeah, you get it high enough, and potentially you could just say, hey, sorry, I get all of your cards, and you're left with like 2 in your library, or none. I exile how many cards in your library, that's a known value. I'm going to cast it where X equals the number of cards in your library. I can cast them on my turn, and then on your turn, you die. Although you do lose all the permanents when they die, so maybe there's a better way to do that, but still very, very cool.
Yeah, it is definitely an infinite mana sink if you do want to try and remove a player that way. So in thinking about how much this is going to be played, you mentioned Gonti. Gonti has seen a lot of play. Two other cards that this really makes me think of are Commune with Lava, which is X red for an instant, exile the top X cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. This sees a little bit of play, not much, but it does see a little bit of play. But the one that I think sees more play is Finale of Revelation. And that's
also reprinted in the recent Commander decks.
Yeah,
right.
In the Commander decks from this set, which is wild. And that's one, for those of you who haven't played with this card before, X blue sorcery, draw X cards. If X is 10 or more, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Exile Finale of Revelation. Yeah,
I mean, I think part of the upside of Finale is, again, your own cards, you're drawing the cards, and you can untap lands if you cast it from enough. But I will say one upside to exiling cards face down is it doesn't contribute to your hand size.
No, and it's highly resistant to hand disruption. So they can't take those cards back.
Yeah, so if you're playing with the pesky Rankle Master of Pranks player, you say, hey, sorry, my hand's empty, but I've got 10 cards in exile from...
Or even just wheel effects. You're drawing back to 7, and then you still have all the cards in exile. Your hand's going to be a lot bigger than every other player's.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Awesome. Well, what's the next card?
Can I do one?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so my first card is from the Commander set. It is from the Deep Clue C Commander Precon, which is all about clues. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll see why it's included when I tell you about it. It's called Innocuous Researcher. It is 3 and a green for a 3/4 creature, Centaur Detective. Speaking of this set being a top-down set, Detective Tribal was one of the archetypes you could play in Limited, which is so absurd, and I think that's amazing.
Super fun, and it was really good.
It was so good. Yeah. I remember I had to buy the first round because I forgot to sign up, and I got to watch Kelton get really run over by a Detective Tribal deck. Yeah. Yep. It did really, really well. That was it. Played really well. Okay, so I'm sorry, Innocuous Researcher, 3 and a green, 3/4 creature, Centaur Detective, has 2 abilities. The first ability is whenever Innocuous Researcher attacks, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, you investigate, then each player draws a card. So it's drawing everyone a card, and at most, which, it's not feasible that this is going to happen every time, but you create 4 clues on its ETB, which is such a crazy rate. And then the payoff is its second ability, which is at the beginning of your end step, you may untap all lands you control. If you do, you can't cast spells until your next turn. So that last caveat makes it less than absolutely broken. But still, if you've built your deck around needing mana on off turns and not casting spells, like activating clues or activating foods, then this is really awesome.
Well, and in green, this doesn't have that much of a drawback. How many instants are you going to be playing not on your turn in green, especially mono green? There's just not that much that you're going to be doing.
Right. You could activate like Kamala Fist of Krosa, or you could regenerate creatures if you're playing in Golgari, or there's like you could put in like surprise activations of creatures. This is basically Wilderness Reclamation on a stick if you are trying to not cast spells. And I will say one of the things that makes this especially good is that you can't use it to cast spells, but you can activate abilities. Like I said, clues and food are the kind of the obvious ones, but some abilities like channel or cycling. So you have that Boseiju in hand or a Colossal Sky Turtle, and you just say, sweet, I've got this mana up. I'm going to I'm going to counter your spell. I'm going to bounce your creature to your hand.
That's pretty sweet. Another mechanic from this set that it works really well with is Disguise or Cloak or Morph, or whichever one you want to think about. Anything that's face down, you can flip up using that mana.
Goodness, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, so if you're trying to flip creatures, if you're trying to activate any sort of ability, and there are so many creatures with just really, really good activated abilities that you can be doing.
Especially commanders.
Especially commanders that you can be just paying mana into. I wish this was in Esper, and I would have put it in my Varina deck.
Yeah.
But yeah, really cool card. I would, again, compare it to Wilderness Reclamation, just on a stick. Like, that's
totally. For the same mana cost.
and the same mana cost,
And
with
you get
additional
clues.
upside. Right, exactly.
Yeah. And draw cards.
And draw cards. And in casual, I will say creature removal is a lot more prevalent than enchantment removal and stuff, but it's harder to counter.
Yep.
And it folds to a board wipe, but I mean, come on. This card's awesome.
And hopefully you've bought some good graces with your opponents because you let them all draw cards.
Exactly. Say, hey, I'm going to play this card if you don't remove it. Hopefully they're wise enough to not take that deal, but...
No, probably not. Depends on how good you are at politicking.
Right, exactly, which is something I need to work on. Kelton's a master. And as such, I never make deals with him.
That's so true. You're so resistant to my politicking. Well, the next card I'd love to talk about is Crime Novelist. So this is 2 and a red for a 1/3 Goblin Bard at uncommon from the regular set. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on Crime Novelist and add red mana. Okay, I think everybody read this card for the first time and it was like, this card is busted, right? It combos with a lot of stuff, right? It does combo with a lot of stuff. A couple of the things that are just like right off the bat. Animation Module, which is a 1 mana artifact that whenever you put 1 or more 1/1 counters on a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, you create a 1/1 servo artifact creature token. So if you have that and you have Krark Clan Ironworks, you create an infinitely big Crime Novelist and infinite mana, because you can keep sacking those tokens to Krark. And it's that one's pretty busted. There's also like multi-piece combos that are a little less streamlined, but with the new Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, and Pitiless Plunder and any sacrifice outlet, then you can also make a lot of mana and a very large Crime Novelist. And I don't think you get infinite goblins off that one.
What's so cool about this is you mentioned Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, which I really think is a cool card. I'm going to be turning my Krenko Mob Boss deck into, I think, a Krenko, Baron of Tin Street deck with some artifact sub-themes. That's not the card we're talking about, but you have to pay to activate its ability, which is very cool.
Yep.
Crime Novelist, whenever you sacrifice an artifact, it's getting bigger, which is good, but you're getting a red, which is crazy.
Really good.
Yeah, it's so good. All of a sudden, like blood tokens, which I think are really underutilized. I had a blood token deck that I built, and they're probably underutilized because they don't feel very good. But if you're doing that if you're rummaging for free with Crime Novelist as many blood tokens as you have because you're generating the 1, that's crazy. And I guess for those who don't know, a blood token is you pay 1, you tap it and sacrifice it, and you discard a card, and then you can draw a card. So it lets you shape your hand a little bit, but it does cost 1 mana. But with Crime Novelist, you're doing it for free.
Yeah, it's really good. Treasures now sack for 2 mana, which is really good. If treasures weren't already good enough in Commander, now they're even better with Crime Novelist. But you really have to have a deck. And also, I did just read it and think about it a little bit more. With Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, it does create infinite goblins. So you will have an army of goblins after that. But you do have to have artifacts that you're sacrificing. Otherwise, this card does absolutely nothing. So you really want it in blood token decks, treasure token decks, food decks, clue decks. So some cards, we already talked about Prosper. It's obviously very good with Prosper. Commanders like Corvold, giving you just extra value when you're sacrificing things on top of the value that Corvold is already giving you.
We finally broke Corvold.
Yay, he's broken now. Stop playing him now, not before. A couple of other ones, though, that I found that I think are interesting are Jan Jansen or Jan Janssen. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. Chaos Crafter. This is red, white, black for a 3/3 Gnome Artificer. He has haste, and you can tap him, sacrifice an artifact creature to create 2 treasure tokens, or tap him, sacrifice a non-creature artifact to create 2 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature tokens. This is really cool. You're just like sacrificing and trading and exchanging artifact tokens, and you're going to get so much value if you have Crime Novelist out while you're doing that.
Yeah, well, those treasure, it's making him the commander pay for itself when it enters, plus 1 mana. So you get out Jan Jansen, Chaos Crafter, and then you get an additional 4 mana on your turn. That's crazy. That's such a
really
good deal. This card is basically Baby Goldspan, right? Except it doesn't create the treasures itself.
Doesn't create
so you
the
do need
treasures.
some sort of treasure creator. But I mean, come on, that's really good.
Notably, yeah. Another treasure creator that's really cool as a commander would be Jolene the Plunder Queen. This is 2 red-green for a 2/2 human warrior. Whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. And if you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. And if you sacrifice 5 treasures, you put 5 1/1 counters on Jolene. What's really cool about this card is then you have access to green, which lets you do all the fun +1/+1 counter stuff, which Crime Novelist is also doing incidentally. So this could be a really fun deck to build as well.
That's very, very cool. I was going to say, so this brings me actually to what I was going to talk about was Zorn, right? So Jolene is kind of a Zorn effect, right?
Yep.
And I think that this card is objectively better than Zorn. Now, hear me out, because Zorn is... You have to get Zorn to stick, first of all. And I think Zorn costs 4 mana, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I believe it is 3 in a red.
Oh, 2 in a red. Okay, so it only costs 3 mana. But you have to get Zorn to stick and then sack your treasures. And then create treasures, right?
Gotcha. Yep.
What I think is really cool about Crime Novelist is you can already have treasures on board. You could have cast a Dockside or whatever, right? Created your treasures somehow. And then as soon as Crime Novelist sticks, you sack your treasures and you're getting value immediately.
That is true. And you can sack them in response to somebody getting rid of your Crime Novelist, and it works. And you never have to crack your treasures for a red because you're getting red. So it also allows you a lot more mana fixing.
Right. So unless you're really wanting the additional artifacts to sacrifice with Zorn to get additional effects like in Korvold, for example, I think Crime Novelist is just strictly better.
It's pretty good. You're right. I mean, it does have effectively the same text as Goldspan Dragon, where your treasures are now tapping or sacking for 2 mana.
Yeah, 2 mana, and one of them has to be red. But
the other thing is, it does other tokens too. It's not just treasures, and that makes it so good.
Yes, the versatility. See, and again, Zorn is only treasures, and I think it makes Crime Novelist just fit more flexible, I think is what I'll say.
Definitely.
Okay, can we move on to Unshakable Tale?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're beginning the journey of graveyard cards because I think graveyard strategies are really fun. So this is Unshakable Tale. It's a 2 and a black for a 3/2 zombie detective. At rare, and it was in the commander decks, and I forget the name of this commander deck, but it's the Dimir Surveil commander deck, and I'll see why it's included in the Surveil commander deck specifically. It says when Unshakable Tale enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1. Whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, investigate. So already really good, synergizes with itself. You Surveil when it enters and at each upkeep. And if it's ever a creature, you're getting a clue for some incidental card draw, which is amazing. And then you can pay 2 and sacrifice a clue, and you can return Unshakable Tale from your graveyard to your hand. Notably, it doesn't say anything about instant speed or sorcery speed, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you can do this at someone's... And so you can hold up mana to crack a clue, and then if you say, hey, I want some more Surveil, I'm actually going to get Unshakable Tale instead with that same mana.
Cool.
I think it's such a cool card. It's so good for any creature-based graveyard strategy, and I would say especially for something like Sidisi Brood Tyrant, which is one of my pet decks.
Yep.
Sidisi, for those who don't know, is 1 green, black, blue for a Naga Shaman, I believe. It's a 3/3, and when it enters or attacks, you mill 3 cards. And then whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard, you create a 2/2 zombie. So you want single mill. Things that mill you for a lot are great because it gets stuff in your graveyard, but you're still only getting 1 zombie if a bunch of creatures are getting put in. So with Unshakable Tale, it triggers when it enters, and then it triggers on each upkeep. And so you're getting a lot of value out of that, which I think is really, really cool.
I think that trigger on upkeep is so good. Surveil is a pretty good mechanic. You can almost equate it to like half a card because you're shaping your next card draw and you're putting things in your graveyard, which is inherently just so good in Commander. So like it's, this is like a bad comparison, but it's very similar to like Phyrexian Arena where it's giving you some sort of card. This is not card advantage, but it's giving you some sort of card filtering every turn, and that's awesome.
Yeah, the funny thing is I've been reading this like at the beginning of your upkeep mill one, and it's surveil
Surveil's
one.
better.
It's so much. You get to look at it, and if it's a creature, you say, "Sweet, I want a clue. I want to reanimate this creature. It's going into my graveyard." If it's a fierce guardianship or a land that you need, you just say, "Okay, well this stays on top. I don't need to surveil it." So the card I was going to compare this to was Old Rutstein, which is has a similar effect. It's 1 green black for a 1/4 legendary creature, and at the beginning of when it enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, so same time frame, mill a card, and then when you mill, if it's a land, you create a treasure. If it's a creature, you create a 1/1 insect, and if it's a non-creature, non-land, you create a blood token. So some additional effects, and the treasures can be really nice, but it is mill, not surveil, and so that card. I mean, cards in your graveyard are always better than cards in your library, but if I get to choose whether or not it goes in my graveyard, that is just so much better.
Yeah, and that extra clause at the very bottom of the card that says 2 mana, sacrifice a clue, return it from your graveyard to your hand. That allows you to like throw it in front of a block, an attacker, and chump block or trade, and not feel bad if you get board wiped. So there's just so much flexibility on this card that I love it.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And again, the pseudo card draw from creating clues when creature cards are put in.
Yeah.
Again, it's not just, at the beginning you have to keep surveil one, which is so good. It's
which would also still be good.
Which would also be very good.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, relevant that it's a zombie, especially in black. A lot of zombie strategies, a lot of things that care about zombies. And zombies care about being in your graveyard. So I think if you're building a zombie deck, this probably belongs in it.
Yeah, it's cool. I like it. Okay, the next card that we have to talk about is another graveyard card. It is Insidious Roots. Insidious Roots is black-green for an enchantment at uncommon, also from the regular set. This reads like a rare, though. It's interesting that it's an uncommon.
It reads kind of like a mythic, if I'm being honest. It's really good.
Creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, which is awesome. And then whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. Okay, this card does a lot of things.
Yes, it does. I'll let you talk about it because this is the one you're bringing to the table, but that is so much on a 2 mana enchantment. Are you kidding me?
It's so good. So obviously the first line, creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. This is good in any powerful token making commander deck. So Grist, the Hunger Tide, you're making insects. Slimefoot and Squee, you're making saplings. Chatterfang, Squirrel General, you're making squirrels. Lateral Blade of Elves, it makes all your elves that don't tap for mana tap for mana. Beladros Witherbloom is really cool. You get to create a pest on every upkeep. So every turn cycle, you're getting 4 creatures that can tap for mana. And then Izoni Thousand Eyed creates a bunch of insects for each creature card in your graveyard. So there's a little bit of synergy there as well. And then those all tap for mana.
Yeah, and notably in Golgari, there's actually a lot of effects that are create some sort of creature token at the beginning of each upkeep.
Yeah.
Which is so wild. Now, those all won't be able to tap at that moment because they likely won't have haste.
Your next turn cycle.
But your next turn, that's like Beladros Witherbloom. You get him out, you get out 1 token each upkeep, and you get 3 additional mana because yours won't be able to tap. But still, that's for 2 mana, that's such good value.
And it's going to be really good in more casual pods because there's less enchantment removal. And so this is more likely to stick around for that full turn cycle, let you get all the tokens, and then let them tap for mana.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also a couple other ways you can go with this card. So if you're thinking about plants specifically, if you want that extra clause that powers up your plants, Grismold the Dreadsower, that's one that creates a plant token for each player, and then whenever and that's on your turn. On your end step, everyone creates a plant token, and then whenever a creature token dies, you put a 1/1 counter on Grismold, and he has trample, so you can get through for a bunch of damage. Avenger of Zendikar makes one every time you have for each land you control, and then as landfall, whenever another land enters, you put a 1/1 counter. on each plant that you control. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, is a planeswalker whose +1 ability puts a 0/1 plant onto the battlefield. And then Turn Timber Sower, I hadn't actually ever seen this card before, but whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you create a 0/1 plant creature token. So once again, more mill stuff. And you're going to be wanting to do graveyard stuff with this card anyway, because you get so much value out of that. So I did find a few cards that help you get things out of your graveyard so that you can create plant tokens. So cards like Tortured Existence. This is a 1 black mana for an enchantment, and you can pay black and choose and discard a creature card to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can actually just loop for as much black mana as you have. You can loop creatures from your hand to your graveyard, and then you create a plant token for each one of those. And so if you have a way to give your plant tokens haste, if you have like Concordant Crossroads or something, you can just keep doing this. You can just keep making a bunch of plant tokens and putting 1/1 counters on all of them.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The part that's relevant about that is obviously there'll be mana dorks on your next turn, even if they don't have haste, but they get bigger too
every time.
So
yeah,
this card would this card would be crazy if it said creature tokens you control tap for 1 mana of any color, and it creates plants when creatures leave your
Yeah.
I think that itself would be really, really good. And the fact that it's an Avenger of Zendikar, not quite to the same level, obviously, but for 2 mana on an enchantment, that's crazy.
It's pretty good. A couple of other cards that do a similar thing are Forever Young and Grave Purge. Forever Young is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, and then you draw a card. Grave Purge does something similar just for 1 more mana. And then there's Morality Shift. This is a weird card. I was looking at this card when I built Magar, because you want to put a lot of things in your graveyard. And it's 5 black for a sorcery. Exchange your graveyard and library, and then you shuffle your library. And so this gets a lot of creature cards out of your graveyard. In fact, all of them, and then puts a lot of them back into your graveyard. So kind of a fun
That's
strategy.
amazing. I will say it is when 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, so it's still only going to get the 1 plant.
You're only going to get the 1. Yeah, that's
but
true.
still, those effects are amazing. I feel like it would do really well. I really like the Tortured Existence. The other one I was thinking of was Phyrexian Reclamation, which does the same thing, but I think for just 1 more mana and some life, just puts a creature card from your graveyard into your hand.
Nice.
I think it's
Or
really
Noxious
good. And then
Revival, I guess.
Noxious Revival could put on top of your library. And there's also cards, if you're not, obviously you're going to be playing some reanimation package because you're in Golgari, potentially. But you could also just have stuff that can exile cards from your graveyard, some graveyard hate, and you're just getting incidental plant tokens and dorks, right?
Yeah.
And so you do that on someone's end step, and you have 2 more mana than they were expecting, and then you can actually play your Avenger of Zendikar to give all of your plants, give all your plants even more +1/+1 counters.
Yep. And obviously, it does great with other cards that make a lot of tokens, like Scoot Swarm. That card is really good on its own and really great with this card. And then I just have to give the token nod to Gravecrawler, where if you're looping Gravecrawler anyway, then you're also making a bunch of plants.
How did I not think about Gravecrawler? Of course, that's amazing. Yeah, if this is another, infinite with, obviously Gravecrawler goes infinite with just about anything that creates mana. But that's so many plants and giant plants.
Large plants. Yeah.
So many large plants. That's amazing.
I love it.
Okay, well, while we're on the graveyard train, we're going to stick in Sultai here.
Sweet.
And we're going to talk about Conspiracy Unraveler, which I think is a sweet card. And I should preface this by saying I've been getting into CDH recently, and the deck I've been playing is Tasigur the Golden Fang. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, he's cost 6 mana, and he has Delve, so you can exile cards from your graveyard to help cast him. And so part of what he does is you cast him for 6 mana, you discount him by exiling cards from your graveyard, and then you use some sort of pod effect, like Birthing Pod, Eldritch Evolution, Neoform, to get a 7-drop. That's the key number there, is a 7 mana creature out on the battlefield. And so there are a couple, whenever there's 7-drops that come out in the Tasigur Discord, people are like, oh, maybe this one has got some legs to it. And obviously in CDH, this is probably not going to see very much play. But in casual, I think this card is going to be absolutely amazing, especially in the late game and in a pod where you don't see as much graveyard hate, which happens to be a pod that I play in, despite me playing so many graveyard decks. Yep. So I should tell you what it does. Conspiracy Unraveler is 5 blue, so 7 total mana for a 6/6 creature Sphinx detective, another detective. They really wanted detectives in this set. It has flying, and then it says you may collect evidence 10 rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. So collect evidence is a new mechanic in this set. So kind of fun that we're reviewing one that's got a brand new mechanic. Collect evidence is when you collect evidence. So to collect evidence 10 specifically, you exile cards with total mana value 10 or greater from your graveyard. So collect evidence X would be exile cards of mana value X from your graveyard, right? Notably, it's not permanence or X permanence, it's total mana value, which I feel like in casual Commander is not very hard to do. Reaching 10 total mana is not particularly hard. You're not going to be able to cast your whole hand with this, and it's maybe not going to like draw you more cards. It's not a Bolus of Citadel, right? You're not paying
and
life
it's not
instead.
omniscience. Yeah.
And it's not omniscience.
Yep.
It's not. I wrote in here that it is basically omniscience on a stick. It's not omniscience, but it can be. I would say in the late game, when you have 20 cards in your graveyard, you're just dumping your hand, right?
Yeah.
For free.
And that is a lot of impact, and that is when you're going to be playing this card. At 7 mana, it's pretty expensive, but in many ways what this reads as is 7 mana for a 6/6 flyer, cast 1 or 2 spells from your hand without paying their mana cost, and that is good.
That's quite good.
Yeah.
That's quite a good rate. And at worst, it's a 7 mana 6/6 flyer, which is not ideal. But a 6/6 flying body,
game.
that's not nothing if you top deck it and have nothing else, right?
Yep, absolutely. No,
Yeah,
this
I
is
think
really cool. And in a couple of the decks you've already mentioned, like City Sea Brood Tyrant, good, because you're filling your graveyard with big things, probably big creatures, and that's what you want to be doing.
Yeah, any sort of mill or self mill is going to love this. I think an example would be I can't remember the name of it right now, and I'm embarrassed about that. But it's the Dimir God that lets you sacrifice or tap creatures to mill that many cards.
Good question.
We'll have to put it in the show notes or something. Put it in the comments.
Yep.
But amazing card and would synergize so well. So it goes. This goes in any self mill, any regular mill where you can also target yourself. I think it's a really, really cool card, and especially in the games. Obviously, not a very good reanimation target. You're not trying to cheat this out early because you're not going to have enough juice in your graveyard to be able to cast those spells for free. But it is still a 6/6 flyer, which is pretty wild.
And I mean, you did mention this earlier. Collecting evidence isn't just creatures, and it's not just permanence, right? It's every card. So this could even be the finisher, the top end of a Spellslinger deck, right? You're going to have a bunch of cards in your graveyard, and this just gives you a 6/6 flyer that lets you dump another couple big spells out of your hand. So yeah, it is more flexible than it looks. It goes in quite a few decks.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool card. I was really excited about it.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay, the next card that I want to talk about is Merchant of Truth. This is from the Precon decks. This is 2 white for a 2/5 Angel Detective. It has flying. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate, and clues you control have Exalted. As a little reminder, Exalted is whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each instance of Exalted among permanents you control. It's kind of a weird card. It's definitely a little narrow. It doesn't go in every deck, but I think there are a few decks that it goes in. I think this probably goes in Aristocrats decks. There's quite a few Aristocrat-style decks that have white in them, where anytime you're getting a passive benefit for things dying, that's a really good thing. This card is kind of similar to cards like Midnight Reaper, Moldervine Reclamation, Liliana Dreadhorde General, Harvester of Souls, cards that draw you cards when creatures die. The thing that you're trading for is instead of drawing cards, you're getting a clue token, which can draw you a card, but it is a relevant artifact and it's giving your creatures Exalted. So that tells me that maybe there's a couple decks that this fits into better, and that's obviously Exalted commanders like Rafik of the Many or Ishin Two Heavens is One, where you're already wanting those attack triggers and you're already wanting those Exalted triggers, but also it kind of goes in some artifact decks like Akiri Lineslinger. This is a really cool card because not only is it buffing Akiri with the artifacts, it's also buffing Akiri with Exalted. So he's getting double buffed by every clue token that you're creating. So definitely some interesting and cool synergies with this card.
Yeah, that makes for a really big Akiri,
Yeah.
which is pretty sweet. The downside being that I have an Akiri deck, and I'm not trying to do a lot of creature sacrificing, so a lot of that's going to be incidental clue creation, right? But in a lot of these decks that do care, and I think Orzhov is going to love this, right? Because not only will you get the value from your creatures dying, I think one thing that Orzhov struggles with often is getting through for damage with big creatures.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
It depends on the deck. Obviously, you have your decks that really care about +1/+1 counters and are going very tall on specific creatures. Elenda the Dusk Rose, for example, creates tons of +1/+1 counters on Elenda. But I do think this assists with a lot of those decks that may have trouble with that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these Orzhov decks are focused on life drain or gain or something like that. A lot of them do have flyers, though, and Merchant of Truth itself is a flyer. So it already gives you an evasive body that can attack and get those Exalted triggers. So, yeah, just some interesting stuff. Thought it was a really cool card. And it reminded me a lot of the card from the Lord of the Rings set, Ramus Ekor Ancient Shield, which is a legendary artifact that whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you draw a card and then you create a 0/3 white wall creature token with Defender. And they at the beginning of combat on your turn, all the walls gain Exalted. So just it feels more flexible than that card. I remember that card coming out and me thinking I really want to build a deck that has this in it, but it's pretty inflexible. It's very narrow. But this Merchant of Truth might be a little more flexible, might be a little stronger.
I mean, yeah, it creates clue tokens, right? So again, you're saying it creates relevant artifacts, and those artifacts draw you cards.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, probably the second best thing behind a treasure token.
Yeah.
Because treasure tokens are free and they give you free value immediately.
Yep.
But that's really, really good. And it, like you said, it's an evasive body itself. So it creates those clues. And then not only is it defensively statted 2/5, so it can block very well. On your next turn, you swing in, and all of a sudden you've had some creatures die, and it's like a 6. It's like a 6/10 or whatever. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. Should be fun. I'm excited to see this one on the battlefield.
Yeah, that's a very cool one. Okay, we're going to venture back to red now, and we're going to talk about Expedited Inheritance. Expedited Inheritance is from the main set. It's a mythic, and it's red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature is dealt damage, its controller may exile that many cards from the top of their library. They may play those cards until the end of their next turn.
Wow.
Very cool card. I will say, when I originally read it, I thought it said they may play those cards until the end of the turn, which for me felt like it was very, very, very good.
Because it makes it more asymmetrical.
Because it makes it way more asymmetrical.
Yeah.
However, I will say, a lot of decks aren't planning on playing with impulse effects, right? They maybe have big creatures. And if you're playing something like this, you're probably playing very low to the ground, playing very aggressive. This will go in the Krenko deck I want to build, a Goblin tribal deck. Lots of really cheap goblins that just gives you card advantage that you have until the end of your next turn, which is really, really cool.
Yep.
And in some way, I feel like I couldn't decide whether or not this incentivizes opponents to block or not block. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
I was just thinking the same thing because I was like, okay, yeah, this goes really good in a really big go wide deck where maybe you're attacking with a bunch of small creatures. They're blocking with bigger creatures, so they're taking damage. So their 6/6 blocks your 1/1, and so you get to exile 6 cards. And as I started thinking about that, I was thinking, boy, exiling 6 cards at a time really starts to add up fast. Actually, you got to watch that.
Yeah, for sure. You could there's definitely room for you to mill yourself here. But if you're attacking with decks that pump your creatures and get bigger, often Goblin decks are you're attacking with a board of 6/1s, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you're exiling. You attack somebody. They have to block as many as they can. They exile 24 cards from the top of their library.
Yeah.
That's a lot of card selection from them. But it also is exiling 24 cards from the top of their library. So, I think there's maybe a place for this one somewhere. I think in a Boros deck with something like Drannith Magistrate, this is very, very mean.
Yeah.
Drannith Magistrate makes it so you can't play cards from anywhere other than your hand that opponents can't. So that makes this extremely asymmetrical.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was a really fun card that I might try to find a home for.
It's a fun card, and I really want to play this at a table at least once. It's the kind of chaos card that Red loves, and that there's so many kinds of effects where it just totally turns the game on its head and feels a little bit wacky. There's a few of those. There's a few of those kinds of cards in this set, where there's like either like mini games or like guessing games or things like that feel very wacky. So this would be really fun to play with at least once.
Yeah, this one felt like it belonged in the Boros deck, right? Because the Boros deck had a lot of those mechanics. This is from the main set, though.
I know, that is wild. I think we saw it at the pre-release. I think I saw it in a game, and it exiles a lot of cards.
Yeah, it exiles a ton. I'd be excited to see if this got any play in Standard. I doubt it does, but that would be pretty cool. Could be pretty interesting.
Cool. That's awesome. No, I like that card, and I'm very excited to see that one played. Okay, 2 more cards to go over here. First one, Case of the Shifting Visage. This is a new subtype of enchantment. This is 1 blue for an enchantment Case. So the way cases work is it has an immediate effect when it enters the battlefield, and then there's a solve condition and then a solved effect. So to solve, you have to fulfill a requirement at the beginning of your end step. So for this one, to solve, there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard, and then once it's solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, you copy that spell. And sorry, the original effect is at the beginning of your upkeep, you surveil 1. So every turn after you play this, you're surveilling 1 at the beginning of your upkeep. Then at the beginning of your end step, if there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard, it is considered solved. And then from then on, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, you copy that spell. So first off, this is similar to the card that we already talked about, the Unshakable Tail, where it's just giving you passive surveils every turn, which is already very good. And I don't think this one's very hard to solve.
No, and it's obviously more mana restrictive. I think if depending on the deck I'm playing, I may prefer Unshakable Tail just because you might be able to cast it more easily. But if you get this one, if you solve this one, which, like you're saying, is not very difficult to do, to get 15 cards in your graveyard, because it doesn't specify. A lot of things that do this will specify you need 15 artifacts or 15, a certain number of creatures in your graveyard. That's not very many cards to get into your graveyard, especially if you're putting one or more in each turn, and likely if you're putting this in your deck, you're trying to put a lot of cards in your graveyard. And then whenever you're casting non-legendary spells, you're copying them, which there are a lot of very good non-legendary spells.
There are. So you really want, as you mentioned, you really want to solve this one as quickly as possible. You want to get those duplicative spells. So it goes best, like you said, in decks that can fill their graveyards. But also, you want it in decks that are creature heavy because it's only copying non-legendary creature spells. Mm-hmm. So that makes me think of a few commanders. First off, some of the Merfolk commanders from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, like Nikansil or Hawkball, which are the ones that are explore decks. So exploring is getting more cards into your graveyard along with surveil. So that's a really great mechanic, and those ones are just chock full of Merfolk creatures that usually are giving buffs or bonuses or some sort of good effect on board, lord effects, anything like that. So you really do want multiples of those creatures. Also, I think it goes good in Sidisi Brood Tyrant. You know, that's a deck that is milling a lot. It's a deck that runs a lot of creatures, so probably pretty good in there. A couple of other really fun ones that I thought about were Runo Stromkirk. This is from Crimson Vow. It's 1 blue-black for a 1/4 vampire cleric with flying. It's got a lot of text on it. But,
It does.
But generally the way it works is when it comes in, you put a creature from your graveyard onto your library. At the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library. You may reveal it. If it's a creature card with mana value 6 or greater, you get to transform it. It transforms into a 3/5 flyer that whenever it attacks, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of another target attacking creature If that creature is a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent, create 2 of those tokens instead. So the reason I think it goes good in this deck is, number one, you want to get those big creatures in your graveyard so that you can flip Runo. But the creatures that you're playing in this deck are giant Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents. So you're going to be running a lot of big creatures. So you're making copies of tokens with Runo, but then you're also copying the spells with Case of the Shifting Visage. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, you're just getting a ton of really big creatures. I think that's a pretty fun one. And then another one would be Muldrotha the Gravetide. Once again, lots of creatures, lots of stuff going to the graveyard. You're getting them back out once you have surveilled them in. So lots of fun stuff to do with this card.
Yeah, love to see 2 Sultai commanders on this list.
Yeah,
Plus, with
you've had
Muldrotha-
both of these. You've had both of these commander decks at one point.
Yeah, at one point or another, I've had a lot of different Sultai commanders. One thing that's cool about Muldrotha too is if someone's like, "Oh, this is too much value," they get rid of it. Well, okay, I'm going to cast Muldrotha, and we're going to start this all over again, and then it's solved on the turn that I played it. So if it gets incidentally milled, it's you play it for 3 mana, and it virtually reads 3 mana enchantment whenever you cast a non-legendary spell, a non-legendary creature spell, copy it.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Which is
it
so
is
cool.
pretty good in the late game and the early game, which I think is cool. Like, you do want to get it out as quickly as possible. You do want to get it solved as quickly as possible. But oftentimes you're going to play it in the late game, and it's going to get solved the turn that you play it, and you're going to the next turn immediately get to start copying things, which is cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. And if you have any creatures with flash, it copies them.
Oh yeah, that's
something
sweet.
like Fairy Mastermind. That's pretty sweet. It's non-legendary.
Yeah, 2 of
you
those
get 2
effects.
Fairy Masterminds. You're drawing
really
2
good.
cards each time someone draws their second card a turn.
Yeah, and
that's pretty sweet.
you'll pay 3 mana for a Phyrexian Metamorph. You'll pay 3 mana for a clone. I mean, like, you're going to pay 3 mana for copies anyways, clones anyways. And so this is giving you tons of value in a longer game.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Yeah, I like that it's virtually, in a later game where you've been milling yourself, it's virtually solved when you play it. It's a 3 mana enchantment that copies creature spells, which is pretty wild, actually.
Pretty good. I think it'll be cool.
Okay, moving to our last card. This is one that I'm excited about. My last 2 were a little bit more on the meme side because I think they'd be really cool and fun. This one is called Immortal Obligation. It is a 1 and a white for an instant at rare. Oh, this is from the Commander set. I can't remember if this one is from... I think this one is from the Boros deck. This feels like it's from the Boros deck.
It feels very Boros-y.
Yeah, it feels... Or at least not necessarily like generically Boros, but this deck it feels like, because this deck has a lot of like funny mechanics in it. So... Immortal Obligation, like I said, 1 and a white for an instant. Return target creature card from an opponent's graveyard to the battlefield under their control with a duty counter on it. So you're not getting anything crazy out of your graveyard, not really anything cool for you, but here's what I love about it. For as long as that creature has a duty counter on it, which is hard to get rid of, it is goated, can't attack you or a permanent you control, and can't block creatures you control. And I think that the second and third clause are so awesome because goated is very good when there's more people on the table, but as soon as it's one-on-one, goad doesn't matter anymore. But with Immortal Obligation, you've gotten out their biggest creature, maybe blown out another player because they have been able to block with this, because you can do it at instant speed, which is crazy. And then not only is it goated, it can't attack you or a permanent you control, and it can't block creatures you control, which is so cool. And I didn't even think about this. Permanents you control, obviously planeswalkers, battles. Are you controlling and defending battles? Do you control them?
Do you control...
I don't know that you control them. You probably just defend them.
Yeah.
If you did control them, I think this would be so cool. This would blank
cool.
battles, which is awesome.
That is pretty cool. Is this just a white animate dead? It's a white animate dead for creatures that are like big and combat focus.
Yeah, for your opponents.
Yeah, but they have to attack and they can't attack you.
Yeah, which is they have to attack, which is so awesome.
Yeah.
And like if they can tap, so like it might just die again, but this could potentially be like a blowout for 2 players, right? Like say you get back somebody's Massacre Worm and you're like, I have no cards on board. For 2 mana, I'll wipe the board with your Massacre Worm and then play my big thing. Like I think this card actually has a lot of flexibility, and I think that's what makes it so cool.
Yeah, the things that you want to avoid with this card are cards that give like really good value effects and value engines, things that give really good ETBs, things that they can sack to get value or things like that, that obviously gets a lot worse. If you give them back a Bone Horde Dracosaur, yeah, it's going to be doing damage, but it's also going to be generating a ton of value for them. So you definitely want to put this on as big of a vanilla creature as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Or something that like maybe stacks out opponents. Like if you're playing, say, I don't know what deck you're playing that's white and not creature focused, but say you get out like their Shieldred or something. Their Shieldred, not the Apocalypse, the original one. The Shieldred,
the Whispering one.
Thank you, Shieldred the Whispering, and the 7-mana one. All of a sudden, everyone else has to sack creatures on their turn, and so do you. But then it has Swamp Walk and is attacking your opponents. It can't attack you. The other use case I thought for this that I think is really, really fun is you can politic really well with this card. So say somebody is about to use their Reanimate or Animate Dead on a creature from your opponents, and you can say, hey, listen, I can make it so you get this creature, but I need X from you, right? I can stop this from happening. Or when they're doing it, you could say, yeah, you get your creature back, but it's not coming at me, right?
That's funny.
Which
That's
I think
funny
is
that
hilarious.
You can blink that, yeah.
Yeah, or someone tries to exile something. Someone's doing some stuff with the Scarab God where they're trying to like steal and exile a creature. I think it's a really fun politicking and cool. And the fact that it's 1 and a white is just makes it so easy to do. Like if this costs like 4 mana, like this would be so hard to be doing off of your turn. But for 2 mana, that's really, really easy.
Yeah, this feels like a fun card. This would be really fun to play with. I do like a lot of these kinds of decks. Like I said, I built a Baloth Baratil deck and Noble Heritage that does some very similar things like this. Like, yes, please, everybody attack. Not me, just everybody attack.
Yeah, you can go ahead and kill each other, and then once you do, this can't attack me anyway and can't block my stuff. Totally. Which I think makes it extra fun.
This will be going in that deck for sure.
Yeah, I think it belongs in there.
That's awesome. Well, that is going to be it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you enjoy Murders at Karlov Manor.
Yes, very, very fun set. We've had a lot of fun talking about it. Be sure to check back next week for another episode. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also visit us at thecommanderpod.com. We'll see you next week, and remember to always pay the one.